I grew up in Mossley Hill, which is South Liverpool, very suburban, sort of 1920s, immaculate, leafy avenues. I don't think as a family we really suited living there. I think we were too sociable as a family and I think we irritated people. I mean, I've always done very well at irritating people. It probably comes from that. I just remember growing up there, when I look at it now, and it still looks exactly the same, and you really feel the seasons in that part of Liverpool, because all the thing I like about it, and I like as a visual, is that all the avenues have cherry blossoms on. So I just remember that being like a very secular thing of, I know how Liverpool feels with the seasons because of the way, because it's such a green place and it's so heavily planted, you really feel the seasons in a way you don't so much in London because it's so concretey. I liked growing up there until I went to high school, and then I just hated it. I think by then I was sort of, the novelty had worn off. I think it was rage. I think knowing that we didn't really fit in there anyway, I'd always sensed that that wasn't for me, and that we weren't going to stay there, and I wasn't going to stay in the suburbs, and that being really aware of the limitations of what those places are, but coming from a really creative family and a very sociable family and a big family, I think that's where the possibilities were shown to me. Because most of the people I probably grew up with probably did buy houses on the avenues, and nice houses, and probably have very nice lives in lots of ways that I don't. So it's not, there's no judgment on it. When you've never fitted in anywhere, it's hard to feel like there's a sense of home. So I find it creepy. There's a few things that things I've brought into my work that have been to do with that sensation of the creepiness of suburbs. I think, well, just, Liverpool's very net curtains. So, as a kid, you're wandering around, you're on your bike, you don't see anyone, it's very quiet. And where we lived in a corner property, and our house was just always very busy, and that irritated people, I think. And there was always music on, and it was quite a party house, and, and no one else lived like that in the area. Everyone else went to church, went to Sunday school, all drove the same cars. It was kind of quite Edward Scissorhands when I think about it now. But nice. I mean, that's not a diss. It's very gorgeous in a way where I'm from, and the architecture is really nice. And my primary school was very pretty. Like when I look at those things now compared to having lived in Hackney for so long, Liverpool's a really splendid city. Like it is really beautiful. I don't think I've ever had that thing in London where, when everyone's like, I just want to go home for a chippy tea. I don't feel that way about the north. That's not what I think is great about it, and I don't like, and I'm not from that sort of family anyway, so I don't have that. I don't have any experience of that like slightly cliched cobbled street north. So I've never not. I mean, in London, I felt like I fitted in because you get to St Martin's, and I know what it was about Liverpool as well. Is that it's very because it's so sociable and people are so almost aggressively communicative, and I don't really like that, and it's half because half of it is really warm and funny and brilliant, and that's what's great about it. And then, but it turns very quickly into aggression, and I think I was quite a shy person, and I just didn't always like people coming at me, And there's a very that sense of everyone looking at you all the time in Liverpool, and it's quite judgy. Not all of it, I'm generalising, but growing up, I remember it's a very self-conscious city, and I hated that. And you come to London, you don't feel that way, because no one gives a shit, and no one cares if you just drop dead in the street. Whereas in Liverpool, there is that, which is the brilliant thing about it. I mean, it's a very odd, as I've grown up, I'd see what an odd place it is to be from, because it's very, very particular, because it's very defined, has a very particular way about it. But also I'm aware when other Scousers talk about, it's fucking great, isn't it, Liverpool? I can't bear that either. Because what I think is interesting about Liverpool and why it is such a weird place is because it was such a big port for so long. So it's like, there's nothing inbred about it. Like the gene pool is really mixed, and that brings with it, exciting dynamics. And also I think when you're from there, you have a sense, because so many people, I think in Liverpool know their story because it is a port, and it's not the same as the northeast, where there seems to be a divide between the people that have just lived there for thousands of years and the people coming in. Whereas Liverpool, you just knew that a bit of your family is from China and a bit of your family is from Ireland and that's, you know, very common. So you have a sense of not being so rooted in I'm Scouse and I'm English. It's more like I'm Scouse and I'm everything, because this is a town of, you know, so many different people coming through. Being a kid of the 80s and how Liverpool was portrayed, I think it made you quite aggressive as a Scouser, even more, because, you know, the jokes around it, you know, which are not funny. Like, you know, there is funny things about Liverpool. I think you did grow up with a sense of, you know, the suburbs were snotty anyway, but also there's this judgment on you from the rest of the country. And because Liverpool, I mean, Liverpool's a really small city as well. People think it's as big as Manchester, but it's not. It's tiny, really, comparatively, but it has a lot of impact. For some reason, maybe because everyone's so annoying. I remember thinking that was not really on as a kid, and that wasn't, I didn't know people like that, do you know what I mean? So those caricatures, I mean, they're almost, it's as bad as racism, really. Not that, you know, there's not a place for, you know, hardcore piss-taking humour, but I think when you do it yourself, if it's you making a joke about a thing, it's very different than someone coming from the outside and, you know, mocking a culture and making out that it's, you know, whatever I mean, what is it, Harry Enfield, you know, those things. I mean, actually, I did see the other day and are quite funny, but I don't know whether the tone is that funny to get away with it. I don't think the wit is that clever. And Liverpool wit is very clever. Liverpool's funnier than those piss takes of it, you know. The wit is sharp in the city. Someone will always be funnier than you, and that's the way, which is irritating, but also enjoyable, I think. Remember that Liverpool was very particular, and it had that, the casuals culture was very, you know, enrooted in the city, which is weird because you don't have that in other cities, but when you're from somewhere, you don't realise that other places don't have what you have as that thing. And clothes were really important. And not even in a way of ostentation, really. I don't think it was about money. I just remember it was really about looking good and appreciating a really, you know, great trainer, rather than it being some stupid, you know, ridiculous, showy off, expensive trainer. It being that, you know, your choices would be on point, and that was important within the culture. It's quite intimidating, but I think as a sort of shy kid, I was quite observant, and I would just observe those things go on, and, you know, I suppose you just do absorb that information. But my relationship with this place is so love-hate, it really, really is. Like, when I'm away from it, I crave it, and I sort of idealise the suburbs and the simplicity, and I think, God, you know, I could go back to Liverpool now and buy the most incredible house, but what would I do all day? Like, what would I can sit in the house and go to Tesco's, like, what would I do? And so there's the comfort of it, and then I'm always horrified. Not horrified, because that isn't to do with the city, it's to do with my relationship and what is right for me. And there is a buzz about Liverpool. I do always get a bit of a buzz out of it because the energy is so particular, and in a way I'm frightened of it. I'm quite scared of the city in lots of ways. And I also, because I know it's such a part of who I am and what I do. And I do remember getting to St. Martin's and, you know, you go through that terrible phase. I mean, going to art school, leaving home to go to art school is a really weird thing to do when you don't know anyone in London. And I remember suddenly being really aware of my Scouseness in a way that I never had been. Any time I travelled, really, I did interns in New York the summer before, and I thought, God, it really comes before you, and I didn't know, I'm not this, you know, you can really dine out on that, and people do. I just suppose I don't think it's always that interesting. It's very easy, and I see it. I think people really take on the characteristics of the city, and it can really become your personality, and you have to be careful with it. Someone from London being, you know, putting on an accent and, you know, dressing like a beefeater, like, you can take on those things. And I remember being aware of friends of my brothers, really nice guys, you know, who were from very middle-class families in Liverpool, but would really, like, put the accent on, because people are so self-aware, and you know you can manoeuvre Liverpool like that. Like, I will do it in taxis sometimes, almost for a thrill. Just terrible, isn't it? Because it's such a funny identity to play with, and you know that, I just remember being very aware growing up, and I would take risks with things I wore, and I could be obnoxious, and I would want to wind people up, because I think I liked the friction of the fact that people clocked you, And we're like, oh, you think you're fucking great, don't you? You think you're this, or your family like this. You know, that aggression is kind of a thrill and also completely loathsome. You know, I felt like I was the vanguard in lots of ways. Because when I, you know, even when I did my MA collection, even on the BA, the things that I thought were valid, which are valid to me, you know, and it was only when I met Louise, really, Wilson, and she was like, you know, I turned up with all my research, and when I started the MA, I'd gone back and I was like, I'd bought every book I could find that I'd liked as a kid, every annual, every magazine. Like, I was like, what makes me want to do this? What am I doing this for? Like, what if I'm going to do this MA and it's really intense? Louise has given me a scholarship. I have to, you know, I have to bring something to the table. And I think she just helped me understand that everything I was doing was valid and it had a point of view. And once you've got a point of view, you're fine, you know, once you know what that is. And no one had said that to me on the BA. I think it's always been a bit sneered at because I wasn't doing something that was very the culture of St. Martin's BA. And that was really difficult, you know, like, because I didn't want to do that thing. I liked clothes and I'd always, you know, liked clothes that people wore. Feeling like the Scouser, you know, the outer towner, that my opinion wasn't valid in that case. That, oh, this is St. Martin's, this is London, so they must know. And actually they didn't know, it was naff. I was right. And just the ghost of that culture and being aware of it and always being fascinated by it, but always wanting to be away from it. It has that, it is the comfort and the horror, you know, that's, it's quite a contrast of feelings. And I like it, and sometimes I really indulge in it and enjoy the nostalgia of it, and you know, I enjoy the fact that I know a lot about my family and that, you know, I can trace them through so many ways in Liverpool, and you know, their different lives. I like that sense of the place for me and the history of my family. And there was lots of people I went to school with whose dads all worked at the Ford factory, and you know, that was very much the culture. And there had been, I mean, my granddad was a manager on the dock, so you know, I came from like so many people do. That was a bit more normal, I suppose, that side of the family. But I just remember in Liverpool when everyone started getting those PV, whatever they're called, PVU windows. And where I'm from in Liverpool, all the windows in the houses are really nice LED lights, like 20s LED lights, and they replaced them with these very plasticky, but it was like, that was a showy off, oh, we've just had the windows done. You know, that statement, and you're like, but it looks terrible. Like, those windows were really beautiful, like, and now they look like Legoland. So I was always horrified by those windows, really. And that sense of closing yourself in with a really thick piece of glass is quite weird, that security of the suburbs. So it looks like one thing, but everyone's got every lock on every window. You know, you walked to school from when you were 6 years old, like you just totted off with your little mates and that's what you did, and then you go out on your bike and you would just be gone. Which sounds very 1940s, but actually it is the late 1980s. Like, it's amazing how that's changed. And because Liverpool, I think in the 80s, had gone through so much poverty in the 70s and the 80s, but had been so incredibly wealthy, and so there's, you know, everywhere there was this faded grandeur of these amazing, you know, shipping merchants' houses that had just been left because everyone in the 80s wanted a red brick new build. So the contrast in the architecture was really heady, because you'd have these like 3 massive merchants' houses in a row, the most gorgeous buildings, detached, incredible architecture, all looking like big wedding cakes down the river, and then an estate, a red brick estate. And everyone wanted to live in the estate, and I think, God, that's so odd when you could be in these houses. And I just had lots of memories of being in those houses and just hanging out, and you know, the sense of the city being very tightly packed in next to each other, those contrasting elements. That I think, as you know, define the way I've worked in lots of ways. I've always liked the rough with the smooth, that, you know, that tension between those things. And I've always been fascinated by that. I've always been fascinated and repulsed by aspiration. I find it like a total turn-off. And, you know, you don't know what your work is as you're making it a lot. It's only with reflection, once you have some sort of body of work, you can look at it. Yeah, it is. Because obviously fashion is supposed to be aspirational, and I find that side of it really repugnant, because that isn't the route I came through it, or why I ended up making the work that I make wasn't to do with selling luxury items. It was more to do with the visual aspect and, I suppose, people's identity through clothes. I mean, now I can break it down. At the time I didn't understand it. I just thought, you know, I was drawing and I liked these images and this was funny, and so I would have to think of something to do, you know, that would get me out. And then I remember being really conscious of that when I was hating school when I was 13, thinking, I don't want to be around this culture. I mean, I had great friends that I still have from school. It's not all negative. But I remember that really crushing crushing me and being really damaging. You know, when you think about how horrible school is, if you have a horrible time at school, and you think, God, it's 5 years. You know, you get through your degree and you think degree's long. Like, it's 5 years, it's shit. Like, that really defines the way you feel about the world in lots of ways. And it's very isolating. And I think that isolation is often where you end up, you know, with the great creativity / mental health outcome of why people end up being creatives, which is a very odd thing to ponder on. I suppose by the time I was finishing my degree at 22, people I knew at school were probably buying houses and having kids, and you know, you're still spinning round. You've taken the plunge and you've dared yourself, and I think my life has always been that I've dared myself. And also I think growing up, you know, having a horrible time at school and feeling very like, fuck you, it's like, you're not going to tell me what I am and what I'm not. Like, you know, I'll do what I want, you know, and I am incredibly stubborn and really belligerent and quite annoying. And I think, but it comes from fighting for survival in that context of like, I'm not going to let you know, my family don't make me feel like this. You're not going to make me feel like this. You know, that mob mentality isn't going to make me feel like this. It's just not, and it's a very hard thing to battle through. And I think I did for years just on my wits and some, you know, proving a point. And then you get to the point where you think, well, the point's proven. What am I making work for now? Like, what is the energy of the work now? Fashion has really, really changed in the last 7 years. So the way you can approach the work is very different because the dream is over, let's face it. But that is really liberating for someone who's made the work that I've made, because I would never, you know, I was never doing a cocktail dress scenario, you know, I was never interested in that dialogue. What I realised when I got to London, and what was so different about Liverpool and London, was how green Liverpool was and how I craved it. And I didn't realise that I'd almost been brought up in the countryside in a way, because you don't think, and when I'd take people I met in London up to Liverpool, they'd just be like, this is not, you know, if you've only seen Brookside, Bread, what else, Harry Enfield, you know, Coronation Street, Liverpool doesn't look like any of those things. It's a really opulent city and it's a very green city. And you know, that is part of the culture growing up. Then you go to the park, and I think Sefton Park is, if I had to pick somewhere that resonated really emotionally with me, I would say it was Sefton Park. Because it's been at every stage of my life, even when I've gone back and lived in Liverpool for periods. It's just, you know, I've run around the park, I've walked the dog in the park, I grew up in the park. As a teenager, we hung out in the park. And also, it's very, you know, in Liverpool, because people are spoiled for choice with parks, no one goes to the park. It's really empty. So you have that space. So now I enjoy it in that way when I go back. And it's such a gorgeous park. Claremont was a house that was always in my family, which is one of those big old shipping houses. And it was just a very, I think the contrast of Claremont, it was bought for my aunt and uncle by Carla Lane. When she moved out, she bought the house and she moved down here. And she was, you know, her success was very, very domineering on my family, I think. And also because this, you know, Bread was based on my family. And I didn't realise it until she died recently. And we all revisited the work and looked at it, and it was all on the telly. I thought, God, this is really odd. This makes me feel insanely nostalgic, and really, it was a really peculiar sensation. Because it was so the end of an era. That was very odd. Because that time, I'd forgotten how heady it was that she'd become this, you know, at the time, insanely famous person, and was very Scouse, but was based out of Liverpool, writing about Liverpool. There was always that tone. I remember feeling like people in Liverpool didn't really like her, because she'd gone to London and she was selling this Liverpool story, but there was a lot of wit to it, and there was a lot of truth to it, and to me, it just looked like my family, because it was my family. And so Claremont was the house we had there, which was very heady space, you know, an incredible building, very that old Liverpool thing. And I think I would just always feel the contrast of spending time there and then going back to the suburbs and think, well, this suits me more, this feels like the space where you can be free. And it was a very, you know, protected environment and quite heady and, you know, a bit out of control. It just resonates with me a lot as a building. And I suppose I was aware of the wealth in that part of the family, because she did make an awful lot of money. And you think there's someone making money from their wit, really, and their words. And that's such a Liverpool truth that, you know, you're not going to go to London and do this, or, you know, be an accountant or make money in the city, but if you can spin your wit into something, you can make a living. And I think that did have an effect on me. I mean, I don't think it was, I think we enjoyed as a family her success, you know, fed into the family, and there was lots of treats that came with that. And I suppose it was odd. It was odd going to school and people, you know, when you're like 9 years old and everyone's watching that on TV, and you know it's your family and based on your family and, you know, your in-laws and, you know, all those things. And you can't almost say it because it's too embarrassing, because anyone would think, because everyone feels that way about it in the city. I hadn't, until she died recently, I hadn't really thought about it in a really long time. It was quite emotional, I think, for all of us to talk about the impact it had had, and that it given us a lot of freedom as a family as well, and to enjoy things, and, you know, making something from your personality. I mean, it's, you know, I couldn't, you can't think about that when you grow up, because you're not, I wasn't self-aware in that way. But there's an option, you know, she'd gone and done this and got out of Liverpool and, you know, built an empire and, you know, had, you know, lots of success, whatever anyone thought of the work. So, you know, that was very different to them being back in Mussley Hill and thinking, I don't want to drive that car and live in that house. Like, there was just this sense of, I have to get out of here. It's literally every time someone writes my name, they write Liverpudlian. I haven't lived there for 16 years. I know loads of fashion designers, and I don't know where any of them are from, and no one says it. You know, of all the people I know at St. Martin's who you might read something about, they don't not automatically, you know, have the name of their hometown in front of them. And it's annoying, in some ways it's annoying, because I think it comes with connotations, but, and also I'm like, why are you saying it? It's never Leeds born or Manchester born. It might be mentioned, you know, and I don't think, there's loads of work I do that isn't about, it's hard because the aesthetic I know is so rooted in my introduction to clothes. But there's different aspects to that, you know? Maybe it's my paranoia and all my hang-ups. I think early on maybe I felt like it was used to devalue me, you know? Like, you're the outsider. Also is backed up by, you know, the terrible pretension and the sort of clichés of luxury fashion women's wear, which so often isn't about ideas. That separation, you know, of like, you can't come here with your tracksuits and do this. I don't think I've ever really fitted in, and even in menswear, I always think that I'm the odd one. Because sadly, through sheer force of whatever's wrong with my personality, I don't know how not to be, you know? I'm not the odd one doing some gothy, like, writing misery on a t-shirt, and, you know, it's very easy to sit in a dirty room and look miserable, but actually to find some, you know, some nuance and some wit and some ideas within a reference, I think, to me is more challenging and more interesting. Not that it's more valid, but it's the only thing I've had to work with, really. I mean, I like opulence, do you know what I mean? There's things I love that are really over the top, and, but, you know, like when you walk down Bond Street and, I don't know, even like, when you call diamonds in for a shoot, or the things that people aspire to are so momentary and uninteresting, like, there's no story to them. Just buying something expensive isn't really a story, is it? Because it's just spending money. And I think there's something in me that appreciates, the dirtier things that I think are funny and that are commonplace. And I mean, even with the sports direct bags this season, like, I'm not talking about production manager, she's like, we should do these leather bags, I was like, I don't want to do leather bags. I don't want to see another fucking clutch bag with another branded brass clip on. Like, what's, you know, if I'm only here once, that's not what I'm gonna make, because it's landfill, isn't it? Like, as nice as the thing might be, I still love the Chanel handbag, and, you know, but only for the wit of it, really, more than the craft of it. And I was like, God, all we use all the time with these sports direct bags, because they're really durable, and you can carry everything. All my friends that are stylists are used, and my friend who's got an allotment carries all their soil in it. And they'd become this sort of visual. And I knew that I was dicing with danger, because I always am. And I know that everyone's gonna have a pop at me. But I'm fortunate enough to not have to give a shit. I never feel my conviction in the moment, but I would guess that the people around me think that, you know, I have it. I'm not aware of it. There's definitely that moment when I'm making those choices, and I think, well, this feels personal to me, and I have to not give a shit. And if you're going to say, I mean, I can't bear the CHAV word. I can't tolerate it at all. I think it's useless. I think it's like the N word. I have no scope for it at all, because I think it can only be used in such a snidey way, and I think it's a word that people have taken for the, you know, for the lower middle classes to mock the working classes, and how is that in any way? There's no wit to it, you know, it's just, I'm all for like, you know, really edgy humour, but there's nothing funny about it. And I suppose I know there's an element of what I do that people would, I don't know why, I suppose if you saw me up in a tagline, Liverpudlian fashion designer, Christopher Shannon, does a Sports Direct bag. I suppose, you know, if you see it in a basic way, well, you know, that's the thing about making work, isn't it? It's open to interpretation, and that's what I always leave it at, because that's what's nice about it. It's never supposed to be one thing or the other, really. I just like the visual. I'd happily make the work and never do a catwalk show. It was never something, weirdly. I think because I didn't have that relationship with fashion. When I left AMA and I started showing, I'd never thought about doing a catwalk show. It never occurred to me that I'd be a brand that did catwalk shows. I didn't think that's the way I would go. And it is such a funny format. But I suppose there is something in me, and I don't know how Scouse that is or whether that's just me, that always does want to irritate people a little bit. I can't help it. Because otherwise, what's the point? And then if you find like something enjoyable in that energy, then, you know, hooray for you, and that's a nice outcome, but I'm not going to not do it. But it's almost, and it's not even like, it's not even for attention. I just can't help myself. And I think maybe that was my survival technique as a teenager in Liverpool. It was like to spin something on its head or find another way to come at it, to get out of a situation, or to be seen in a different way, to avoid detection almost. You use whatever you have, don't you? Whether it's some wit or whether it's, I don't know, something else. Pretension, you know, there's different tools you can employ to get yourself out of situations. I suppose that's been mine. I don't know why I do it. Sometimes I wish I didn't. Because it causes me a nightmare as well, you know. My own behaviour often has many times backfired on me. Collins was like my saviour. It was like I was hanging on from school on a cliff's edge, like wanting to die and hating it. And Garland's was the thing on the next cliff that was like a safe house. Because Liverpool, you know, clubbing at that time, it was quite unsafe. I mean, I'd left home at 15, I'd moved to town at 16, and so just went out all the time. And it was nice, I liked feeling free of the suburbs finally, and just, it was scary because I was a kid, and I was, you know, basically living on my own. But I had lots of friends and I was sociable, and I went out a lot. And you know, when you think back and think, God, I had no money, what was I going out on? And I met this boy who I was hanging around with, who I think was probably a rent boy. And I was so enticed by that seedy underworld, not the sex, but just the mood of like going downtown. And because that part of where like the gay bars have been and the indie bars, there's like 3 divisions to Liverpool. There was Bold Street, which was kind of quite groovy, and you know, at that point had like Cafe Tabac. Safe houses where you felt all right. Because Liverpool was intimidating, you know, if you're a fashion kid running around at 16, annoying people, you know, you could get into quite scary situations very easily. And there it is again, isn't it? You know, whatever that is that makes you want to annoy people. I don't know, I suppose I'll talk about it in therapy, but that was, you know, that was kind of a nice town where Cream was, but I was too young to Cream. I could never get in because it wasn't one of those places that would let you in if you were underage. And my brother went to that in the academy, and then there was that glut of like very, you know, the showy off places where you went on a Friday and, you know, you copped it off, and, you know, it was all very like John Barnes was there. There's those places where you couldn't get into either. So as a kid, you go to indie clubs or gay clubs, don't you? Because they're the only places that let you in. And there was all these gay bars that were like, I don't even know if they're still there, the Curzon, which is, they were all under office blocks, so it's like going into the city now and that being where all the weird bars are, like it just wouldn't happen. So, and at night the city would close down, there's all these incredible buildings, then all these little neon lights go on. And I remember walking into the Curzon, I was probably 15. Oh, and it was like all mirrored, and there was like softcore porn. It was very 60s, 70s, you had to knock to get in. Like Liverpool was quite old school, like still in the mid 90s, even though Cream was happening, there was this older version of the city, which was really interesting. Like I remember thinking, this isn't going to last for very long. Like, and nowhere looks like that now. You can't find a bar that has that weird hidden feeling. And then Garland's opened, and I remember, I don't even know anyone knew where I lived at the time. Knowing I'd have to get into town on the bus, you know, undetected, and then you'd know that Liverpool was sort of place that time. If you went to that part of the city, someone would go past and be like, hey, fucking queers going there. Like, it was really aggressive like that. And even if you were with people that weren't gay, like, everyone took the abuse. But Garland's was like, I remember walking in and it being like completely transformative within 10 minutes. It looked like nothing else. It was, the atmosphere was incredible. I had this friend who she was really off her face at the time, and she said to me, God, don't you just love Garland's? It's like pure love vibes against all adversity. And it became this like terrible off your face tagline, but it was true, because it was the one place in the city where there was a weird safeness to it. The music was great, the mood was great, it was really unpretentious. It wasn't snarly, it was probably very druggy. I didn't do loads of drugs, but people, you know, it was probably quite pilly, but in a really nice way. And suddenly that was when I started meeting people outside of that very suburban lifestyle I'd had as a younger kid. I was like, okay, this is where people go when they're going somewhere. This is how you meet people. This is how you get away from that shit that I just always hated, you know? Stuck between that suburban thing of suburban snobbery and then that sort of rough Liverpool arseholeness. It's not a great place to be, really. I mean, thank God I had my family and their weird eccentricities and the people that we were surrounded with. I don't know what I would have done really otherwise. Maybe I just would have sank into some way of being. And Garland's also, I remember, and you'd had to keep it quiet that you were going to Garland's because it was known that it was a gay bar, like, but it wasn't like a gay bar like the Curzon was a gay bar, which was like, I mean, I say gay bar, you know, these gay bars would not be seedy in comparison to, I'm sure, things that exist now. They were probably very, very naive, but to me at 15, they were quite intimidating. And Garland's just had this completely different tone. And then I remember, you know, you couldn't tell people that you went because it was like this secret club, and especially when you were still at school. Like, imagine going to school, what did you do? Oh, I went to Garland's. Like, you know, in my secret junior Gautier trainers that no one sees. Like, you know, you find those secret things until you get out of it. And then my nan asked about it one day, and I said, someone says you're going to this Garland's place. You know, and in small cities things become notorious, don't they, quite quickly. And she said, where is it? And I said, it's on Eberley Street. And she said, oh, that's the old Eberley Street dance hall. I mean, your granddad used to court there. And next time I went, I looked up, and all behind the rigs was the original ballroom ceiling. And I was like, you know, that's just like a Liverpool, that way of, you know, making something out of that old grandeur that was really, you know, me and my nan had both gone there as teenagers in completely different formats. I like that in a smaller space you can, you know, find those narratives if you want to enjoy them, like, you know, it's cute. It's been useful for me in a way that at least I've come from a place with such an identity that I do have a visual identity that I grew up with, that I didn't have to go and find one. There was enough information around me to engage me and give me a point of view. The very particular thing about it definitely affected the way I put work together. Because there's definitely always a point with work where I think, it's almost a voice from Liverpool saying, what knobhead's going to wear that? Like, that comes into play, you know, and that definitely affects the way that I look at fashion and the way that I critique things. Not that it stops me making knobby moves. Like, I'll still do it, but there's definitely a level of like, oh, come on. If it's not funny and it doesn't look good, bin it off. Like, don't just make it for the sake of some other weird thing. Which may be why I struggle being a fashion designer sometimes. Because other people would make work in a freer way. Maybe I am bound by some very innate, difficult Liverpool identity that makes me look at things in a certain way, and maybe if I wasn't, maybe I was from somewhere where you don't identify so much, I would work in a freer way and that would be different. But I don't envy that. I don't ever want to be, I don't ever think about wanting to be that. You're from a place with such a weird identity. But the archive is documentary in theme rather than decorative in theme. Like, it's not like I'm from, you know, a tribe in Greenland and it's a very particular look that is like that. It's more conversational than that, I think, and more observant, as you say, it's like, I do feel like my work is like a bit like a documentary. And documentary has always been the thing that I love as well, like just looking at, you know, society.